Dear Xi Jinping, this episode is not an open invitation to invade Taiwan. It's just the hypothetical reasons why any military advantage China has right now is fast eroding. Hey, thanks, Hua! China would need to invade Taiwan within the next 3 years if they want to take advantage of 4 key factors that are in their favor right now. These factors may not be what you think. They include China's aging demographics, current problems within the US military-industrial base, the PLA's modernization timeline, and issues with the US Navy's sea lift capabilities. Let's analyze why China's window of opportunity might be fast closing. Welcome to Ridge Wallet's top secret laboratory, where we've designed everything you'll need on your mission to destroy the dinosaur that's escaped and is attacking downtown Citiesville. Hurry up, science nerd, I've got evil dinosaurs to stomp. First up, we have your Ridge Carbon Fiber 3K wallet. It has room for 15 $20 bills. Use the cash to try to bribe the greedy dinosaur to stop his rampage. And unlike your old bulky wallet, this will fit into your skin-tight combat suit. My favorite part is the aluminum cavity tray, where I can fit my spare change. But do you have anything that'll help with the lock shock collar around the dino's neck that's driving him crazy? 3 other Delta Force squads already tried and failed to unlock and remove the shock collar because they kept awkwardly fumbling with their old keychain, failing to find the correct key. We've developed a Ridge key case that neatly organizes all your keys. Wait, there's one more thing. You can use this Ridge 24-karat gold wedding band ring to profess your love for the creature. Wait, I do what? The dino will have no choice but to accept once it sees the beautifully crafted, unique, dual-layer ring design. It's Ridge Wallet's 10-year anniversary. You can click the link in the description or go to ridge.com/taskandpurpose to get up to 40% off your order. That's ridge.com/taskandpurpose. We've all likely heard of China's declining birth rates, but I think the military consequences of this are less about the lack of population and more about the economic drain, because the ramifications of the one-child policy, a policy limiting Chinese birth rates as recent as 2015, is now creating a demographic bubble that will soon become a serious burden to China's growth. While China's population is not projected to shrink enough to threaten its ability to invade and occupy Taiwan, its aging demographic threatens to constrict its economic growth, as China might be facing a problem where they get old before getting rich. As of 2023, China has an estimated population of over 1.4 billion people. Their population is so large that it accounts for roughly 18.5% of all people on Earth. China also has a military to match, with the largest number of active duty personnel in the world, with 2 million soldiers. This massive population was controlled starting in 1980 with a policy called the one-child policy, limiting households to 1 child per family in order to prevent an exploding population from draining the wealth from China's economic growth. The CCP removed this policy in 2015, but this manipulation has caused China's population age density to appear egg-shaped, with the highest percentage of its population between 50 to 30 years old. Geopolitical expert Peter Zion explained this best in the Joe Rogan Experience.
Without young people, we've seen their labor costs increase by a factor of 14 since the year 2000. Their educational system focuses on memorization over skills, so despite $1 trillion of investment in a bottomless supply of intellectual property theft, they really haven't advanced technologically in the last 15 years.
In 20 to 30 years, this bubble will shift into old age. A Pew Research report found that by 2035, the elderly population is expected to rise to 30%, or more than 400 million people. So what does this mean for China's ability to invade Taiwan? And could decline in the young population threaten China's ability to occupy the island? A historical study conducted by the US Army and later covered by the Washington Post says the ideal ratio for civilian to troops during occupation is 50-1. With a population of 23.9 million people and a low declining average growth rate, China would need around 470,000 troops to occupy the island. This may seem like a high number, and it is, but it's not actually the real problem here, because even the most aggressive estimates put the Chinese population at 480 million people by the year 2100. This means the population numbers alone are not really the major problem like a lot of people might think. No, we wouldn't be seeing China setting up some grandpa brigades or boomer storm units. The real problem is economic welfare. But don't take my word for it, the Chinese Communist Party themselves have realized this. A Chinese state report characterizes the issue with the phrase, "getting old before getting rich." The Chinese report projected that between 2025 and 2030, China's total population will peak and grow negative. Authoritarian regimes are particularly vulnerable to poor economic performance. In a democracy, changing administrations means that the current president can always blame it on the last guy. But with President for Life Xi Jinping, this is not the case. This means that an economic crisis will inevitably create legitimacy problems that pose an existential crisis for the regime. And so, solution to that problem for China would be to take Taiwan's semiconductor market. Hey Xi, it's me, Cappy again. I want to be clear, I'm not accusing you of actively planning a military invasion right now. So can you please reverse that negative 5,000 credit score so I can come visit Wuhan? Okay, thanks. China's solution to the economic problem could be in part solved by usurping, which I just looked up the definition of, and apparently it means taking illegally by force, Taiwan's monopoly on the semiconductor and computer chip market. Cheap Chinese copies are a well-known staple in the global market. However, the complexity of microchips coming out of Taiwan is just too difficult to reverse engineer. If you can't beat them, join them. And by join them, I mean force them to join you through military invasion and occupation. Stealing Taiwan's semiconductor and microchip business is like Xi Jinping's get-rich-quick scheme that your uncle's always telling you about. Sure, it might stave off the economic burden looming in the future, but then both you and him end up in a Long Island jail. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company is one of the most profitable in the world and the most valuable company in Asia. This is because the company sits on a staggering 53% of the global semiconductor production market and provides 92% of the advanced chips used in modern electronics. A CSIS report in 2022 said that all major US defense systems and platforms rely on semiconductors for their performance. But nothing lasts forever. The virus that definitely didn't come from a lab in China shut down global trade, woke Americans up to how reliant our technology is on Taiwanese semiconductors. I'm fully woke now. Right now, the US produces only around 10% of the world's chips, but President Biden's CHIPS and Science Act, passed in 2022, is specifically intended to improve domestic production to counter China. The CHIPS Act will light a fire under Xi Jinping's booty. This means that unless they act soon, China will not be able to enjoy the profits of the exclusive market before the United States and its allies create competition in the chips and semiconductor business. The pressure to find ways to economically support China's aging population, coupled with the fleeting opportunity to use Taiwan's exclusive markets to solve this problem, could be one of the driving factors for China's military acceleration. Because ever since the Chinese Communist Party consolidated power over mainland China in 1949, they looked east, 100 miles off their shores to Taiwan, as a final outpost of resistance for the previous nationalist government. For 74 years, China has applied military, political, psychological, and economic pressure to reunify the island under mainland control. When Xi Jinping addressed the party Congress last year in October 2022, his words remained focused on peaceful steps to coax Taiwan back into the warm embrace of authoritarian China, and he did not signal that invasion was imminent. Infantry wins battles, logistics wins wars. The war in Ukraine has had an interesting side effect that is making it more likely for China to need to invade Taiwan faster. Because for the first time, it mobilized the US defense industry to try to meet weapon and equipment demands at a level that it had not had to operate at for decades. As a result, new evidence suggests that from the manufacturing floor to the last tactical mile, the US is not prepared to defend Taiwan right now. A 2023 report released by CSIS asserted that the United States would likely run out of some munitions such as long-range, precision-guided munitions in less than 1 week in Taiwan straight conflict. I need air and artillery assets, time now, danger close. No, I don't want to talk to Raytheon customer service.
Here at Raytheon, your mission is important to us. Your estimated wait time is
nice.
3 weeks.
Kind of catchy. However, these realizations are as much an opportunity for China as they are a wake-up call to improve the form and function of the US military supply chain. While the current state of US logistics may be inadequate to face off against China, this will not be the case forever. And Ukraine has given the US the proper headspace and timing to fix these issues. After decades of fighting with asymmetric dominance against opponents without a modern air force or navy, the United States military structure that supports the warfighter has traded in capacity for efficiency, leading us to the problems in the US military industrial base. A 2023 report from CSIS found that the US defense industry base lacks adequate surge capacity for a major war. One of the main issues that the report finds this is that The US military services have underinvested in weapon systems and munitions for a conventional war, and the DoD's acquisition system faces challenges in creating the incentives for industry to invest in sufficient stockpiles of key weapon systems. Like any other capitalist industry, US defense companies are driven by supply and demand of a changing market. When their primary customer, the Department of Defense, scales for a war on terror, they position their industry to meet that requirement while cutting waste, like maintaining the ability to surge for large-scale combat. As a result, lead times for weapons like precision and guided missiles that are essential for any future war with China now have lead times that are incredibly long. It can take roughly 2 years to produce some types of missiles, such as the PAC-2, PAC-3 air and missile defense systems. Furthermore, it would take an average of 8.4 years to replace major defense acquisition program inventories at surge production rates. Meanwhile, China has rapidly expanded its production capabilities for missiles. According to the Department of the Air Force's China Aerospace Studies Institute, China continues to have the most active and diverse ballistic missiles development program in the world. A 2019 report from Reuters quotes US military officers, Chinese and Taiwan analysts agreeing that China's missiles rival or outperform their counterparts in the armories of the United States and its allies. With missiles playing a critical role in modern conflict over Taiwan, this places China in an advantageous position. Meanwhile, the US would struggle to find enough long-range ammunition to continue to fight after only a few days or weeks. It's important to note here that the supply deficiencies realized in the CSIS report are not a result of the US supplying Ukrainian forces against Russia. Instead, they are systemic deficiencies in how the military-industrial complex is designed. The war in Ukraine simply brought these issues into light after the defense industry was mobilized for the first time in decades to support a conventional conflict against the modern military. In other words, it's not supporting Ukraine that's making the United States weak. Rather, the conflict revealed the United States' deficiencies in a way that was not previously possible. This naked vulnerability in industrial capacity is a major incentive for China to invade Taiwan before the United States is able to completely reverse and strategically pivot to great power rivalry. This pivot to China began to slowly take place under the Trump administration and has continued since then. However, the window to use this opportunity of weakness is closing. This is thanks in part to the United States' support of the war in Ukraine. In this case, supply follows demand, and now that this demand in the US defense industry is awakening, the industry has a new purpose to pivot towards arming for conventional adversaries. Problems in the US Air Mobility Command. On February 1st, 2023, the head of the U.S. Air Force's Air Mobility Command, General Minihan, wrote an all-hands memo predicting 2025 war with China and demanding that all leaders have to go faster. Despite this call to action, it appears the U.S. military has neglected the one thing they needed for it to go at all. General Minihan's call to action follows years of systemic underfunding of aerial refueling platforms. War games predict a fight with China over Taiwan would rely heavily on U.S. air power, with the U.S. maintaining a narrow advantage with its fifth-generation fighter attack aircraft. From this, assumptions are made that critical systems supporting these aircraft have had the same care and attention, which is simply not the case. Any tactical advantage in the air is deeply undercut if capability to refuel is limited from a strained and dated aerial refueling program. The War Zone reported that if the Air Force retires its legacy platforms like KC-10A and the KC-135R, it'll drop the quota below the congressionally mandated fleet of 479 tankers. The average aerial tanker in 2021 was 52 years old, meaning some flying today were built when the US was still fighting the Vietnam War. Furthermore, the retirement of these aircraft are outpacing their replacements. While the US faces problems with this program, China does not share these concerns when it comes to invading Taiwan. The US will be the one that needs to reach Taiwan. For China, the fight is in their backyard. And it also manages a string of man-made islands with runways and refueling stations for aircraft. If all of this information is making you uneasy about a future war, don't worry. YouTube is banned in China, so Xi Jinping will probably never see this video. However, as it is above, so it is below, and the United States also faces a serious dilemma when it comes to refueling at sea. The MCS oiler fleet is another strong area of concern for getting fuel the last tactical mile. In January of 2023, capability analysis of US tankers concluded that the Department of Defense is projected to need on the order of 100 tankers of various sizes in the event of a serious conflict in the Pacific. The DoD currently has access that it can count on, assured access to less than 10. Tankers are primarily used to transport fuel between commercial refineries and DoD storage and distribution facilities. From there, oilers from the Military Sealift Command can deliver oil to naval ships at sea. However, according to a 2021 government maritime report, the US only has access to 54 military useful tankers and 64 tankers overall. These numbers fall incredibly short of the projected 100 tankers needed to refuel a war in the Pacific. While the US Navy does remain the world's premier fighting force, its lifeline to project power and sustain at sea is in critical condition. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine has placed China in a strong position to secure its oil needs from its neighbor Russia. As a result of the war, Russia began looking for a new seller to replace its losses from European sanctions. China quickly stepped up to fulfill this need, and Russia became China's largest oil supplier in 2022. On the sea, China is one of the world's largest ship-owning nations. However, by 2030, China plans to complete a $100 billion oil pipeline that will mitigate any vulnerability that they had before of oil delivery through maritime choke points. This planned date of completion is around the same time China's military capabilities plan to be ready for an invasion. However, deficiencies to US logistical support will not be an enduring problem. So China needs to act soon if it plans to use this comparative advantage. The United States Navy is developing and testing a program known as Consolidated Cargo Replenishment at Sea, or CONSOL. This allows for a non-military tanker to quickly outfit with temporary equipment to fill the role of an oiler, refueling combat ships at sea. This cuts out needing to send fuel to pre-positioned depots. China's geographic advantages to the proximity of Taiwan will never change. However, China's advantage right now is in their relative strength when compared to the logistics needed to win a conventional war in the region. This advantage is not static, and the US has concrete plans to shorten this gap in the near future. How much of an advantage will proximity be for China when the United States modernizes its assets and builds bases throughout the Philippines? The longer China waits to invade Taiwan, the more time the US has to reorient its grand strategy to face a great power rival. All the while, China's youth bubble begins to gray. The heat got turned up in March 2023 when China's new foreign minister, Qin Gang, held his first press conference in his new role, and he used the chance to warn that conflict and confrontation with the United States is inevitable if Washington does not change course. Can we get a peer mediator or a third-party arbiter to help here? Because I'm pretty sure we're at an impasse. China's foreign minister went on to say the US claims it seeks to compete with China but does not seek conflict. But in reality, the so-called competition by the US is all around containment and suppression, a zero-sum game of life and death. So from China's perspective, reunification with Taiwan is an existential problem about more than just a territorial claim. It's come to represent the bigger problem that China insists the United States is working to suppress their ability to grow and prosper. China's already laying the rhetoric justification for invading Taiwan that sounds eerily familiar to what happened when Moscow justified invading Ukraine. China claims the United States is quickly moving to expand a kind of NATO-Pacific alliance against them, forcing their hand. I didn't want to invade Taiwan. Look what you made me do. How could you force me to invade Taiwan like that, you monsters? However, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, the CIA Director, William Burns, and the Commander of U.S. Naval Forces in the Indo-Pacific, Admiral Philip Davidson, all agree China is accelerating its timeline for military modernization for the purpose of invading Taiwan. These are some of the same people who correctly predicted a Russian invasion. So I don't know, they might know what they're talking about with this. These leaders testified that modernization targets originally planned for 2035 to 2050 are being moved to the left so that China can be ready to invade Taiwan as soon as 2027. This planned acceleration is not just a paper tiger. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, China's Power Project, has monitored air incursion activity since 2020. Below is a sample of the People's Liberation Army Air Force incursions into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ, an invisible border dividing the 100-mile strait between Taiwan and mainland China in half. It is clear the military activity around the island has increased in frequency and size just over the last few years. If this wasn't enough proof of escalation, according to the Financial Times, Taiwan has observed dozens of Chinese military balloon flights in its airspace in the recent years. far more than previously known, because there's something China wants to peep on real bad, which is what are the US capabilities that could stop them from invading Taiwan. If Xi Jinping is truly focused on bringing about a peaceful reunification with Taiwan, then why is there a new sense of urgency to accelerate their military capabilities? China is a nation with the longest continued written history in the world, 3,500 years. Their storied past, an authoritarian form of government, it actually gives China the ability to think and implement truly long-term strategies that do not risk being overturned like they do in democracies when a new administration gets elected to the office. However, Xi Jinping is pushing 70 years old. If the leader wants to see Taiwan return to China in his lifetime, then the ability to create a long-term strategy is shortened to just 10 to 15 years. The decision to invade Taiwan and whether China needs to do so sooner rather than later relies on two difficult to answer questions. Does China think Taiwan will put up a fight? And two, does China think it can win? Professionals like CIA Director William Burns and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley that have access to classified briefs and probably know a lot more about China than me think the answers to these questions will prevent China from invading Taiwan in the near future. And in February 2023, in a televised interview, Burns said that after watching Putin's army struggle in Ukraine, Xi Jinping and his military leaders have doubts today about whether they could accomplish that invasion. When General Milley testified to Congress about future Chinese invasion, he said that by 2027, China wants the capacity to attack, but I see no evidence of that actual intent or decision making. While the war in Ukraine has created opportunities to encourage a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, it has also demonstrated how much determination and will to fight can derail a modern military and drag it into a costly, protracted conflict. This is why the best thing Taiwan can do now is to prevent China from invading, to show that it has the will to fight. The longer Xi Jinping expects Taiwan to resist, the costlier of an option it'll become. But what do you think about China's pressure to invade Taiwan soon? Do you think Xi Jinping needs to invade sooner rather than later, or is it to his benefit to wait and prepare longer? Let me know in the comments section below, and thank you very much for watching.